So I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
You're right.
And just imagine you're standing in this centuries-old South Indian temple. It's dusk, right? The air is it's thick with the smell of camphor and jasmine flowers.
Oh, I can picture that.
Yeah, and the stone floors are like really cool under your feet. And right in the center of the courtyard, lit only by the flickering light of these oil lamps, there's this highly revered dance being performed.
Wow.
It's this act of absolute devotion, full of, intricate geometries, fierce eye movements, and just this really deep rhythmic intensity.
It is, it's an incredibly powerful image to start with, because you're visualizing a time and a place where art, religion, and, well, just the rhythm of daily life were completely inseparable.
Right. But the story we're diving into today takes a massive, totally unexpected turn, because that exact dance you're picturing in that temple, it would eventually be completely outlawed.
Entirely banned.
It would be fought over in national newspapers. It would be stripped of its original name. And it would actually go on to become the center of a furious debate in modern academia.
Which is wild.
It is. So our mission for this deep dive is to untangle the incredibly complex, highly controversial history of South Indian classical dance. We're focusing on the massive shift from the traditional Devadasi system to what we, now know globally as modern Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi.
And looking at the stack of research you brought us today, we should probably warn you right up front. This is not some dry, dusty historical overview.
No, definitely not.
The author of today's primary source is deeply, deeply passionate. I mean, they're bringing historical citations and legislative records to the table, sure, but they're using them to mount this fierce, visceral defense of a specific historical lineage.
Yeah, they do not hold back.
Not at all. The author's perspective on who actually created and owns these dances is aggressively defended, and it clashes directly with a lot of modern academic theories.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really can't understand the controversy happening today without understanding who the original dancers actually were. We have to start with the Devadasi system.
Right, so Devadasi translates literally to servant of the deity. And in the medieval and pre-colonial periods, these women were highly honored temple dancers.
Yeah.
They were symbolically married to the temple deity.
Okay.
And what is absolutely crucial to understand here is just the sheer rigor of their lives. They didn't just, casually learn a few dance steps.
Right, it wasn't a hobby.
Exactly. Our sources highlight that they were scholars in their own right. They were rigorously trained in ancient scriptures, complex Sanskrit, regional grammar, music, and of course, intricate dance techniques.
Oh, wow. That's a massive curriculum.
It was. And the people teaching them this vast curriculum were traditional male gurus, specifically from Brahmin and Natuvana communities.
So they were the keepers of the art form, right?
Yeah.
Holding this really prestigious, protected place in society. I read they even held land grants from the temples.
Yeah, they had immense status. But as we move into the 19th century, that immense respect just completely unravels.
Right, that falls apart.
The decline was systemic.
Yeah.
And it really came down to a massive shift in patronage. Because as the British colonial presence grew, the power and wealth of the traditional temples waned.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so without the temples to support them financially, the patronage for these dancers shifted to royal figures, local kings, wealthy zamindars, and, private landlords.
Which fundamentally changes the dynamic. I mean, think about it. When you're funded by a temple, you're a conduit to the divine.
Exactly.
But when you're funded by a private, wealthy landlord, you just become private entertainment. And the source mentions they were pushed down, quote, wrong paths, unquote, which honestly feels like a really polite euphemism.
Yeah, it is.
What were the actual, physical mechanics of that shift?
Well, it meant they were forced into positions of severe financial and frequently sexual exploitation. Their livelihood was just no longer secure.
God, that's awful.
It is. They had to rely on the whims of these powerful men for their actual survival. So the spiritual devotion was increasingly overshadowed by the demands of the patrons.
It's like a sacred, heavily protected religious institution being entirely secularized by these incredibly wealthy elites, slowly corrupted by those new power dynamics, and then, just to add the final nail in the coffin, being criminalized by the state.
That's a really good way to put it.
Because that criminalization is exactly what happens next with the anti-Nach movement.
Right. And the anti-Nach movement is this fascinating, messy collision of different worldviews. On one side, you have British colonial rulers bringing their Victorian moral sensibilities to India.
Right.
They looked at these dancers who were now stripped of their original spiritual context, and they saw them purely as street performers or prostitutes. Then on top of that, you had Christian missionaries who viewed the entire temple system as, heathen and immoral.
Wait, I totally get why the British colonial administration and the missionaries wanted it banned. I mean, they're projecting an outside morality onto a foreign culture. But the sources show that some of the most prominent leaders of this ban were Indian social reformers.
Yes, they were.
A major figure mentioned is Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy. And why would an Indian reformer want to destroy her own culture's ancient art form?
It's a great question. And to understand Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy's underlying logic, you really have to look at the reality on the ground at that time. She was a pioneering medical doctor.
Okay.
And she was witnessing firsthand the devastating health and social toll of the exploitation these women were facing. For reformers like her, the profound spiritual context of the Devadasi was just long gone.
So she just saw the abuse.
Exactly. They believed the entire system had devolved into this irredeemable social evil that tracked women in abuse. To them, eradicating the system wasn't about destroying art. It was an urgent feminist cause to protect women.
Wow. So you have this incredibly powerful coalition, British moralists on one side, Indian reformers on the other, all pushing for abolition, which eventually leads to actual hard legislation, right?
It does.
The Bombay Devadasi Protection Act of 1934, and then the really devastating blow, the Madras Devadasis Act of 1947. That act completely banned the dedication of women to temples and essentially outlawed their traditional livelihood.
Literally overnight, an ancient lineage of art, something that had been practiced for centuries, was rendered illegal.
And if you're wondering how an art form actually survives an outright legal ban on its sole practitioners, you have to look at the 1930s. This is a decade of intense cultural warfare, primarily playing out in the pages of the Hindu newspaper.
Oh, the press wars.
Yes. I love this part of the history because the stakes are incredibly high. You have this fierce war of words happening in print. Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy is arguing passionately that the system is inherently abusive and just has to be dismantled.
And stepping up to counter her is Krishna Iyer. He was a lawyer, a freedom fighter, and this profound lover of the arts. And he argued that, sure, the social system had indeed become corrupted, but the art itself, the actual physical geometries, the rhythm, the storytelling, that was fundamentally sacred, and it had to be saved at all costs.
And he didn't just write angry letters to the editor, though.
No, he did not.
Krishna Iyer literally dressed up in female attire, in full traditional Devadasi costume, and performed the dance himself on public stages.
It's amazing.
He was daring the public and the authorities. He basically said, look at this, watch the movements. Is this obscene? No, it's a magnificent classical art form.
Just think about the risk involved in doing that. Yeah. As a respected male lawyer in the 1930s, it was a massive public spectacle. But while his performances proved the artistic merit of the dance, the legal battle to save the Devadasi system was ultimately lost.
The bans went into effect anyway.
Right. So the preservationists realized that the only way to save the physical movements of the dance was to completely change its cultural wrapper.
They had to launder its reputation.
What's fascinating here is how they did it.
Through institutionalization, right. Around 1932 and 1933, the Madras Music Academy passes resolutions to officially erase the traditional names of the dance. They took the names Sadir and Dasyatam.
Because those names carried the heavy social stigma of the outlawed Devadasi system.
Exactly. And they rebranded it with a much more ancient, respectable-sounding Sanskrit name, Bharatanatyam.
And the rebranding wasn't just in name. It was a total demographic shift. The text highlights Rukmini Devi Arundale, who was this visionary from an upper-class Theosophical Society background.
Right.
She actually learned the dance directly from traditional Devadasis and Natuvan art teachers. But in 1936, she founded an institution called Kalakshetra. She took the dance out of the hereditary homes of the Devadasis, removed the more sensual elements to appease Victorian sensibilities, and turned it into a formal, structured, highly respectable academic course for upper-class women.
See, this is where I really struggle with this historical narrative. Yeah. Because looking at what the Madras Music Academy and Kalakshetra did, it sounds like gentrification. Wait, so they saved the dance, but they completely stripped it of its original name and removed it from the people who originally performed it. Isn't that a double-edged sword? I mean, they handed it to the upper classes. Isn't that a form of cultural erasure disguised as a rescue mission?
You're touching on the brutal calculus of the era. The counter-argument from the preservationists of the time was that the building was already burning down. The legal bans were passing.
So they felt they had no choice.
Right. If they hadn't given the dance a respectable new name, moved it to a proscenium stage, and taught it to middle-class women, the entire physical vocabulary of the art form would have gone extinct. It is a defining double-edged sword of this history. The art was saved, but the original artists were sidelined.
And that exact tension saving the art versus changing its ownership is what fuels the fiery modern controversy at the absolute heart of the source material you brought us today. Because the text we're looking at is written in the present day, and it is furious about how this history is being interpreted.
Oh, the author doesn't mince words, especially when addressing modern academic theories.
I was actually shocked reading some of these passages. The author is pushing back against modern foreign university researchers who suggest the dance was culturally appropriated. The text actually refers to one of these modern critics as an unfortunate bird with a deceitful mind spreading garbage.
Yeah. The language is intense.
It even says that for these critics, the money they earn and the food they eat by teaching this dance is equal to impure food, which, just to be totally clear to you listening, we are absolutely not taking a side here. We're just reporting what is in the source impartially, but it's undeniable that the author is incredibly passionate.
It shows just how raw and deeply personal this debate still is. The author is mounting a ferocious defense of the traditional male Brahmin and Natuvvanar lineages against modern claims of cultural appropriation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's break down that modern academic argument. The modern theory often implies that upper-class Brahmins and men stole or appropriated the dance from the Devadasis only after it became socially acceptable and rebranded as Bharatanatyam.
Right.
But the author of our source material aggressively rejects that timeline.
The core argument in the source is that the Kuchipudi Brahmins and Natuvvanars did not appropriate the dance because they were the foundational architects of it from the very beginning.
Right, they built it.
The text insists these male gurus were the ones who taught the Devadasis the scriptures, the complex rhythmic structures, and the movements. Therefore, when the Devadasis were legally banned from dancing, these male gurus didn't steal the art. They simply stepped out from behind the scenes and onto the stage themselves to ensure their own ancestral knowledge survived.
It's literally a debate over who holds the true historical copyright to the tradition. And to understand the author's defense, we have to look closely at the sociological dynamics, because the text makes it clear that South India is not a monolith. The roles of these male teachers varied wildly depending on where you were.
Exactly. Let's look at Tamil Nadu first. The traditional male gurus who conducted the dance there were called Natuvvanars. The text specifies they were largely non-Brahmins, specifically from the Izai Velar community. Their role was the Natuva Mela tradition.
And what does Natuva Mela actually look like in practice, like on the stage?
In the Natuva Mela, the performance is a solo female dancer, the Devadasi. The Natuvvanar is the conductor. He sits to the side, wielding the cymbals, reciting the complex rhythmic syllables, and guiding the performance. He is the director, but she is the singular focus on stage.
Okay, got it. But when you cross into Andhra Pradesh, where the Kuchipudi style originates, the dynamic completely flips.
It does. In Andhra Pradesh, you had the Kuchipudi Brahmins, also known as Bhagavatulu. They were strict, orthodox male teachers. The text uses the term Natyamela to describe their tradition.
Right.
Unlike the solo female performance, the Natyamela was an ensemble male-led dance drama tradition. Entire troops of men would perform the mythologies. The author points to research from modern scholars like Devesh Soneji and Dr. Sunil Kothari to prove that these Bhagavatulu were the absolute bedrock of the region's performing arts education.
I mean, imagine someone telling you that the art form your ancestors spent hundreds of years directing, scoring, and choreographing was actually stolen by your family. You can see why the author gets so visceral and defensive. When you understand the depth of the Natyamela tradition, the fury in the text makes logical sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, historical narratives are guarded so fiercely because they are tied to identity and survival. But having established the deep pride and the strict orthodox roots of these Kuchipudi Brahmin teachers, we really have to look at how their tradition evolved.
Because it did evolve.
Right, because if you go to a Kuchipudi performance today, it is famous worldwide, and it is performed brilliantly by women. So how did an exclusive male-only Brahmin tradition open its doors to the very women they share the stage with today?
Well, to figure out how the doors open, we have to look at how tightly they were shut in the first place. The text traces the origins of Kuchipudi all the way back to the 13th century. It started as a strict male, Brahmin-only art form performed by wandering troops in the villages of Andhra Pradesh.
They were fiercely committed to maintaining what they called devotional purity. The rules were so rigid that men played all the female roles in the dance dramas to avoid bringing women into the troops, and they were wildly successful at it.
Yeah, the source has this amazing detail from 1675. The Golconda Nawab, Abul Hassan Tanisha, was watching one of these wandering Brahmin troops perform, and he was so mesmerized by their skill that he literally gifted them an entire village, an agraharam, just so they could settle down and focus entirely on perfecting their art.
Which created a completely sealed cultural ecosystem. The knowledge was passed strictly from father to son within that specific village. But, the reality of history is that no ecosystem stays sealed forever.
Thankfully.
Right. As we move into the 19th and 20th centuries, the social landscape is shifting dramatically, and a few visionary gurus realize that isolation equals extinction. The text highlights one paramount figure, Vedantam Lakshminarayana Sastry. He did the unthinkable for his time. He broke the centuries-old rule of the agraharam and began teaching women.
This is one of my favorite turning points in the whole deep dive. It's like, imagine a family possessing a closely guarded, ancient culinary recipe that has only ever been passed from father to son for 500 years.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
And suddenly, the patriarch of the family looks around the changing world and decides to share the secret ingredients with rival master chefs from completely different regions. And the result isn't the dilution of the recipe, it sparks an absolute golden age of innovation.
That cross-pollination is exactly what happened. And the source text provides a beautiful, tangible piece of historical proof for this collision of worlds. There is a photograph mentioned from 1948 that really captures this monumental shift perfectly.
I was actually staring at the description of this photo in the notes. It completely upends the idea that these different groups were totally siloed off from one another.
Yeah, in the photo, you see this great Orthodox Kuchipudi Brahmin guru, Vedantam Lakshminarayana Sastry, sitting down and teaching the legendary dancer T. Balasaraswati.
And Balasaraswati comes from a highly respected traditional Devadasi lineage, the very lineage the Brahmins were historically separated from.
Exactly. You have this strict male Brahmin tradition collaborating directly with the hereditary Devadasi tradition. The text details how Sastry taught her the incredibly nuanced layers of abhinaya.
Right.
Abhinaya is the deeply psychological art of expression, using micro-movements of the face, the eyes, and hand gestures to convey complex emotional storytelling.
It just proves that despite the furious modern academic arguments over who appropriated what from whom, historically, on the ground, the gurus and the dancers ultimately collaborated. The text also mentions figures like Nataraja Ramakrishna, who purposefully studied under both Devadasis and Brahmin gurus to eventually synthesize an entirely new style called Bharatanatyam. It became all about bringing the different streams of knowledge together.
This raises an important question, really, because it shows us that rigid traditions only actually survive by eventually bending to new realities. If the Kuchipudi Brahmins had stubbornly refused to teach women, or if the Natavanars hadn't bravely stepped onto the public stage when the Devadasis were legally banned, these intricate physical vocabularies might be entirely extinct today.
When you zoom out and look at the whole timeline, the journey is just staggering. We started in the sacred oil-lit courtyards of South Indian temples. We moved through a dark period of royal exploitation, then a Victorian moral panic led by colonialists and Indian reformers that resulted in the outright criminalization of an ancient lifestyle.
Then we saw the desperate defiance of lawyers dancing in drag, the massive, arguably gentrifying institutional rebranding by the Madras Music Academy, and finally this deeply complex, fiercely debated modern legacy where different lineages, Brahmins, Natuvanars, and the descendants of Devadasis are all fighting for their rightful place in the historical record.
Yeah.
For you, listening to this, I think it highlights why untangling this history is so vital. We tend to look at classical traditions, whether it's dance, music, or theater, as these permanent, immovable stone monuments that have always existed exactly as they are today. But they aren't.
No, not at all.
The survival of our most beautiful cultural expressions almost always depends on complex, deeply messy, and sometimes highly controversial compromises. It relies on the stubborn dedication of a few individuals who simply refuse to let the fire go out, even if it means changing the hearth.
It really makes you rethink the art and culture we consume today. It leaves you wondering about the modern globalized stage. When an art form is saved, but it's saved by changing its name, stripping it of its historical religious context, and completely altering the demographics of the people allowed to perform it. At what point does it become an entirely new art form altogether?
It's a huge question.
It is something to keep in the back of your mind the next time you see any ancient tradition presented for modern consumption.
It's a tension that has no easy answers, which is exactly why the debate in our source material is still burning so hot today.
It absolutely is. Thank you for bringing such incredibly rich, passionate, and challenging sources to the table for this deep dive. Keep questioning the history behind the art. Keep looking for the mechanisms behind the shifts. And we'll see you on the next deep dive.